Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. This time, super excited. We have didn't even get to the right thing. Doggone it. We have GM Connie Chang joining us from Transplanar, from all sorts of stuff all over the place. Connie, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Ezra.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun conversation. So, what was your intro to GMing?
So I started GMing way back in 2016, which for me feels like a long time, but is not a long time for a lot of other people. And I was sort of like the forever GM because none of my friends wanted to GM. So I was like, you know what? I'll hitch up my big boy trousers and do it. But I ended up really falling in love with it. And in a lot of ways, I think I prefer GMing over playing, just because of the kind of person I am, and the kind of like control I like having over like a particular realm, particular like NPCs that populate it, and the kinds of themes we explore. But yeah, that was my intro to GMing, specifically through Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And that was when like the Adventure Zone was like blowing up and getting like really, really big. So all of my friends were listening to Taz, were listening to Critical Role. And I was sort of like taking my cues from like how Matt Mercer and like the McElroys were like doing it, but also like trying to find my own voice as a GM and my own style. And then like I got the chance to play a lot, which was also a lot of fun, but that was my intro to GMing, 5th edition, D&D specifically, like 2016.
That's really interesting what you say about sort of, I watched these other folks kind of model, for lack of a better term, what a GM does, but then you tried to find your, and so like, what are some things you found that were, oh, this is a way I want to do this versus how other people are doing it? Like, how did you find that unique voice?
So even before I was a GM, I've always been like an actor and a performer and an improviser. I've been doing improv comedy for over 10 years now at this point. I started in like 7th grade in like my high school improv troupe, and then like continued it through college, and I still do it now. And I've also always acted, high school, college, professional theater as well, like outside of that, now that I'm based out in the Twin Cities. It's Minneapolis, Minnesota. And like a screenwriter. That was what my undergraduate degree was in. I had a degree, double major in screenwriting and critical race studies. So these 3 different kinds of experiences, I think, have all equipped me with a very strong, like story-based and like performance-driven DMing. So the feedback I've gotten from my players, like across the table, is that like I'm a very energetic DM. Like I love descriptions. I love big plot twists. Like my NPCs are always like emotionally driven, and I'm always like trying to find the emotional core of a story, as opposed to like, here are some puzzles, here are some random encounters, right? Which the time and place for that can be a lot of fun, right? But like, that's not sort of like the kind of DMing I'm drawn toward. Something else, totally, I think the Adventure Zone, they do a really great job, especially in later arcs of their like first main D&D campaign, I think, balance. But especially when they were first starting out, it was very like comedy, right? Like they're great improvisers. It's all like very humor driven, which I thought was great. But I was particularly interested in telling a darker story. Like all of my premises, that I would pitch to my players were like really like horror based, or like post-apocalyptic, like survival, like a messed up like kingdoms and queendoms with like, lots of like political intrigue, which I didn't really see modeled specifically in the Adventure Zone. But I'm not gonna lie, I did steal puzzles from like streams I'd watch and like actual play podcasts I'd listen to, because that's one piece of GM advice.
Hey,
steal shamelessly.
Good GMs borrow.
Yes.
You find I didn't have, I'm a little older, and so I didn't have streams of games. I would go to cons and I would like say, oh, I really liked when that guy did that. And I would remember that. And sadly, in that day, it was always a guy. Luckily, that is slowly changing. But, I liked when they did that. I want to copy that. I want to steal from here. I see a lot of through lines. This Call of Cthulhu GM is very happy to hear that you like the darker stuff.
Yes, I love horror.
But, I think there's like I run horror, but really the players bring ridiculous comedy to it. And so I love the sense of the world is going to hell and these people aren't taking it seriously and everyone around them is terrified by it because, like they're like wisecracking and, it's a beautiful juxtaposition. I think, improv comedy is a great intro to it. But and Karen 12s, I think was, we talked with her, and she actually has a book, Improv for Gamers, that walks through that. But then also studying theater and learning like character building and character development, and things like that is hugely important.
It is. Yep.
And being able to have a character, just being able to think about what this character wants, even if it's the shopkeeper in Crappy Town X, is a huge thing. How have you found that? So how are some ways that being an actor has brought, obviously everybody thinks, oh, you can do voices and you can, that sort of thing. But what are some of the like more internal things that like having an acting background brings?
Well, just knowing like what does my character want in a scene is like the biggest thing. Like what's the emotion? Like what's the driving emotion in this particular scene or sequence of scenes? As well as like having an idea for your character's flaws. I'm speaking specifically about when you're a player character, because embodying NPCs, I feel like, is slightly different on the GM side, because you're juggling like a dozen different characters versus just thinking of the one character if you're a player. And I think this also like feeds very much into like the difference between a streamed or a home game, because I'd never expect my players in a home game to be able to be like these amazing, incredible actors or performers. Right? We're just doing this to have fun. You can just play yourself. This can just be a self-insert, like whatever. I'm fine with that, right? But when I'm talking specifically about Transplanar RPG, I'm always giving like notes, right, to my players who I also see as actors and performers, right? So I see my role as a GM, but also as a facilitator, and in a lot of ways like a director and a dramaturg. So I'm like, I want to push your acting in your character this way a little bit more. Like that felt kind of jarring, So we always have like a debrief session after every episode streams to talk to affirm each other and also give feedback, both to me as a GM, but to each other as like players and performers. I would say in a streamed medium, when it's just our face, a lot of the physicality that I feel like is so important to a theater actor is sort of takes a second seat to the dialogue. And to how you describe what your character does. So instead of acting it out, and like having all that like interiority show through your body and through how your blocking is and through like what you do on a quote unquote stage, my players just narrate, and they narrate interesting things that their characters do that betray their inner feelings, but they say things that contradict what they do, right? And, something I always think is fun is when you lie in a scene, like you say you're okay, but you're not, or you say you're not okay, but you're actually like manipulating, someone into like betraying a false kind of vulnerability. There's a lot of like fun things that I think players with a strong acting background can do in a scene. And of course, a lot of improv training, comes to supplement scene work, just classic, like saying yes, giving gifts to your other players, picking up on what they're putting down,
Accepting.
finding exactly. Yeah. Finding the game in a scene is less important because we're not actually doing improv comedy. Right. But a lot of like the foundational skills apply.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I really think in terms of like, from an early age, I had really jarring problems with D&D, and it was because D&D and Dungeons and Dragons is a lovely game, and all the disclaimers that I need to put in here, but it's not a story game, and that was what I'm starting to realize is what I wanted, because I wanted to say to the guy who, the knight over there on the left of me, like, oh, you've got a tail, and in D&D, you turtle. No, this is my character. I decide what happens to my character, and in a story game, it's okay, yes, I have a tail and it's poison, you add on to that, and it just keeps building. And that, there were in the early days, there weren't really games that did that. And that was really kind of a box that I was fighting against. And honestly, is part of the, probably some of my deep-seated issues with D&D. But I agree. I think improv is a great way to kind of approach this stuff. I also was really interested when you talk about that feedback session. I mean, I think that's something you should do with your home, and I'm sure you do, but, GMs at home, do that with your home game as well. Maybe not after every session, but every couple of sessions, a quick, how are we doing? And check in with players. If a player's had a rough episode, if for whatever, if a rough a game, like maybe they weren't responding like they normally do or something like that, just check in with that player and say, hey, am I not giving you what you need? Is there something else you want from this game? Like when I run a game at a con, at the break, so the halftime of the game, I actually will just say, is there anything that has to happen in the second half of this game? And if a player says there needs to be a car chase, well, doggone it, there's going to be a car chase. That there's nothing wrong with saying, what do you guys want? And how do you want this game to go? And, to your point, it's different streaming game versus home game versus con game. They're all, how you approach them is very different. And, I do all three, you do all three. It's a different experience, and it's a little kind of schizophrenic as you're kind of doing it. But what are the through lines that you see there?
For just like GMing advice in general?
Well, things that, like, I'm running a stream game, I'm going to do this, but also I would do it in my home game and in a con game.
I would say pay attention to what the players want. And to make sure that everyone is on the same page about the premise. Because I would never, if I'm running like a con game and like the game is like Call of Cthulhu, right? And someone's like, I'm going to play Dickie Dickinson, who's a living talking sausage. I'm just going to be like, you're probably at the wrong table.
Right.
My friend, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In stream games as well, I always like make the premise really clear. If it's like a one shot with guest players on our channel, I'll be like, hey, this is like a high seas adventure, where there's going to be a storm and probably like a sea monster attack, right? So build your characters with that in mind, like both in terms of like your character sheet, like the abilities you pick, but also in terms of like your backstory, right? Like this, might not be it could be really interesting if you played a fire genasi who's on the high seas and terrified of the ocean. Like that could be interesting, right?
Right.
It could also be interesting to play like a weathered sailor or like a stowaway, like whatever it is. Like I love it when players make characters that fit the premise, or like pre-gens, I suppose, which will inevitably fit the premise.
Right.
But for a home game, I think there's a lot more time and flexibility for me to tailor the premise to the characters. I'll usually reverse engineer it instead of approaching like my home players with like a list of potential plots. I'll be like, give me the characters you want to play, and I'll make a plot that like draws on all of their backstories, right?
Yeah.
But the system usually helps guide the kinds of characters they create. So for instance, for one of my Patreon home games that I'm running for my champion tier patron, we are playing Monster Hearts 2. So everyone knows they're going to play teenagers, they're going to play teen monsters. That's the same page that we're all on. We're probably going to the setting's probably going to be like a small town with a high school, right? But with that in mind, they made really interesting characters. We had a session 0, and I'm using all the ideas they threw out during the session 0 to generate probably, I could foresee the arc for the next couple of sessions, and potentially I've generated end game ideas for each of their characters, where a villain campaign wide villainry plans can go. And
so
for
how many games do you run a week?
So I also run a home game with my partner, and we do that 2 to 3 times a week, right?
So you co-GM. Oh no, you're running a game for
yes, for my partner. It's a one-on-one game, using oh my god, I forget the sword, the crown, and the unspeakable power, something like that, I think is the name.
Oh right,
Scups.
Yeah.
Scup. Yeah, it was kickstarted a couple years ago. So that's 2 to 3 times, and I also run Transplanar. So let's be conservative and say I run the home game twice a week. And then Transplanar, that's 3. And then there will almost always be the occasional odd game that I'm either playing in or running in, either for a different, a different stream channel, or on someone's podcast, or it's my Patreon game that I run once every 2 weeks. So 3 to 4 games, I think, is a safe estimate.
And what, I mean, it's different for every game, but what do you find your prep time is? I'm sure the prep time for Transplanar is different than the prep time for the home game, but... Yes,
I'm very intentional about, for the home game, a lot of it is improv, but when important plot beats or set piece encounters will happen, I know there's going to be a royal dance, in this coming session, or I know there's going to be a horse chase, I'll prep that, right? But for my home game, prep is minimal. I just sort of refresh my memory of what happened last session, and I like jot down a couple of notes of like what could happen, and like ongoing like plot mysteries or intrigue I'll like write down, and then I'll just run it with my partner because we know each other so well. We just sort of like improvise and bounce off of each other. For Transplanar RPG, takes me maybe like an hour and a half to 2 hours before every session. How I like to prep for that is I run the game on Saturdays, right? And then I put it away and I don't think about it until the following Saturday, because I don't have the mental capacity to do that. Occasionally during the week, I'll shoot ideas back and forth with various players, or I'll give more in-depth feedback, or be like, I need this from you as I'm like thinking of ideas. But that's probably only like 30 minutes to like an hour of stuff like during the week. And then right before the session, we stream Saturdays at 3 p.m. US Central Time. So I'll wake up at like 9, I'll like get my morning going, and then around like 10 to 12, I'll sit down and I'll just do work. I'll take a break, I'll eat lunch, and then I'll sit back down and I'll do work again. And our call time's at 2:30, right? But I'm usually in the video chat at like 2, like putting, and by that point it's like production prep, right? Like updating the overlay, like queuing up publicity posts, right? But like 1 to 2 hours dedicated of just like session prep.
So you're the producer as well. You're one-stop shop. Are you guys using Roll20 or?
We do theater of the mind stuff. Good. So we don't have battle maps at all. We also don't use like D&D Beyond for like a character sheet keeper or anything like that, because so much of our stuff is homebrew, that I'd have to do like a lot of work, on the back end to do stuff.
I mean, people are afraid of. I shouldn't say that. Let me think of how to say this right. There's a lot of people who are concerned or don't see D&D as a theater of the mind game, but I think it's actually really great as a theater of the mind game, because it stops being about like, okay, where am I exact? And it becomes about these big sweeping movements
like
and
awesome, like cinematic things you can do. Yeah. Yes. We have also like, I don't know, how's swearing? Like, how are we with
Go to town. Nobody watches this.
Okay. We've homebrewed the fuck out of combat. Like we've gone through a lot of tests, a lot of like, experiments of like how we want combat to go, and the way we have it down now is like super homebrewed to like optimize for like a theater of the mind streamed like situation. So we don't even really like, we roll initiative because it's fun to say roll initiative, right? Because that's exciting and fun for us. But the way we do like attack rolls, like there are no misses. If you don't hit the enemy's AC, I'll still let you roll damage, but that means the enemy gets to take a reaction, right? They get to do something and that just speeds up combat, and that helps like balance out the action economy a little bit more. So it's not just like PCs walking up to a big bad and whacking it and killing it before it even gets to go. You know what I mean?
I'm glad you brought this up, because so I've watched. I haven't watched a lot, but I've watched some Transplanar, and like I really like the rules change. Like I feel like you've taken D&D and you've made it almost like pulp action kind of,
oh yeah,
like just everything's and I really like that. My home game I'm running right now is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and one of the big things in the new version of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is that everything is like opposed rolls. So combat, like I'm attacking you, you're rolling against your skill, I'm rolling my skill, and if I succeed, I hit you. If you succeed, you fought it off. But if you succeeded and rolled a critical, you have now critical hit me. So like combat becomes this terrifying thing that nobody wants to get involved in. It's a really a fascinating switch. And with the rules change you made, I mean, you haven't just made combat rules changes. You've done a lot of stuff with the skills and with skill checks that I think are really neat. How, are you sort of play testing it as you go and kind of calibrating, or, is it okay, we've got this and we want to, this is how we want to do it, and we're going to keep the rules kind of set like that?
It's really interesting you bring that up, and that's a really great question, Ezra, because we recently released Arc 1 Episode 1 of our past streams as a podcast, like edited down, and I'm the one editing it too, right? My partner is also like, we switch off like every other week, like who edits. And something I realized is I ran a combat, right? Episode 1, that was like vanilla D&D. Right? It was like roll initiative. All right. Oh, you didn't quite hit its AC. I'm sorry. But even then I was doing a little bit of homebrew stuff to like take the edge off. Like if you don't hit the AC, tell me what you do, and I'll let you like lower its AC based on like what you did. So it'll be easier, like stuff like that, like moving on. And it's just incredible how far we've come, because right now I'll just be like, what do you do? All right. You do it, roll damage. I'm not even going to make you roll to hit, because it wouldn't be interesting if you missed. You know what I mean? So much of it is dictated like fiction first in our streamed game. I'm not sure which episode you watched most recently. I'm very happy that you like watched one of our episodes though.
I mean, I really enjoy the table that you have there. I think that, you know, you've got a really good mix of personalities and you know, and interesting characters. And I mean, you have that's the kind of table that I would love as a GM, because I feel like you could walk away for 30 minutes and they would just sort of be in character bouncing off each other.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you noticed in the first half of our most recent episode, there was just this conversation between two characters, and I like muted my mic. I sat back and I just started drinking water and like watching, you know, like that went on for like 15, 20 minutes. And I just let it play out because it was a really interesting convo.
Something else I really like that you do as a GM, and that I think is a great, you know, this is like a micro tip for anybody, is that you egg the players on. You know, you'll give them you'll say like, that's outstanding, or, you know, do more of that, or just, you know, and that verbal feedback and affirmation just makes the players want to keep doing the stuff that's awesome.
Oh, I'm really glad you pointed that out, because I think that's something I do almost subconsciously. Like they'll do something really cool and I'll be like, oh, that's really awesome. You know, and the mechanical way to reward that is inspiration, right? But my players are literally, they always have a full inspiration track every time, because I let them stack it up to 3, because why not? So instead of giving inspiration, I'll be like, that's great. Oh my God, yeah, ooh, I really like that, you know? And you're right, it's like a little treat. You know, I'm like, here, have a cat treat, you know? And they're like, ooh, I'll do it more next time, you know?
And you know, who can't remember. I think I was talking about it with somebody. Was talking about, you know, Quiddy, who runs now everything.
Oh, Abria Yangar,
outstanding.
She's amazing.
She, you know, somebody was talking about her reaction when a player wanted to do something really dumb, and she was like, "What?" You know, and people were talking about how, you know, oh, as a GM, I try not to do that, but it's great to see somebody do that. And you know, my point is, yeah. If my players want to do something dumb, I'm going to let them know, you know, are you sure? You know, but also if they do something awesome, tell them, you know, like give them that affirmation, because players, you know, players need to be pulled sometimes into, you know, the good players are often like, okay, I've done enough. I need to give the camera to somebody else. You're like, no, what you're doing is awesome. Keep doing that. You know, I want to see more of that.
Definitely. That's definitely been feedback I've given my players before, especially when we were like first starting out and like didn't really know each other, like still getting used to each other. Like one of my players would be like, I didn't want to take up too much space, but I'd be like, no, that was great. And other players would be like, yes, please. Like, I love it when you step forward and like say stuff in character, because then that like makes me feel like I can do that too, you know? And like, sometimes I don't know what to say. So it's nice when you step up and like take charge and like take the spotlight for a little bit. And I think my players are pretty good about sharing the spotlight. They're all like pretty willing to like cede it, and they're pretty like self-aware when it comes to like how much attention they're taking up, for sure. And as an aside about like players doing dumb things. So I have feelings about this.
It's the best.
One, I love it. First of all, I love it. And second of all, I think there's a difference between a player doing something risky in game or something suboptimal in game, right? Like your gnome being like, I want to lick the rock because I'm a rock gnome and I love rocks. I feel like that's funny and in character and great. And, you know, especially if I've set up that the rocks are poisoned and they still want to do it, then that's them taking like, you know, what's it called? A calculated risk. Like they know that their tongue's probably going to sizzle off, but they're going to do it anyway because it's part of their character and I love it. Probably give them inspiration. I'll probably let them learn things about the rocks that they couldn't have learned if they didn't lick it. You know, I'll reward them for taking that risk. What I will never do as a DM is like, be like, that's dumb, you know, or like be like, all right, now make a death save, you know, and like punish my players for trying to engage with my world in a way that I don't think they should engage in, because I just want to put out there that if there's no necessarily wrong way to engage with my world, as long as you're being respectful, if that makes sense, right? If what you're doing is clearly coming from a place of like, I don't care about this world, I don't care about the other players, or like, I just want to be like kind of racist or sexist, like then I'm going to like talk to you out of character, right? And be like, cut that shit out. But other than that, it's pretty much fair game.
Right. Me. Yeah. I think that's a great point is, you know, it's, you know, just because they're doing something that doesn't appear smart doesn't mean you can't like give them information. They can't get a benefit from it. You can certainly give them constraints from it, or you know, give them disadvantages from doing things like that as well. But the main point is, it's okay for you to appreciate and to to enjoy your players doing awful things. You know, I have a famous like minute-long cheering session when one of my players fumbled in a critical moment. I was very happy. It made my day. You know, running stream games is such a weird animal. It almost, you know, I always joke it's like I'm 30% a GM and 70% a game show host. You know, and I wish those percentages were maybe reversed. And I think once we're back in studio, they will be. Like, I've really struggled with running game, because we would always play in studio. Our game, we're lucky enough, everybody's local, and so we'd be at the same place. And just, I realized how much that energy matters to me, of being at the table with actual people. I just was able, in the last couple of weeks, to start my home game playing at, you know, everybody's vaccinated, so we all started playing together again, and it reminds me of just how much better it is for me playing with actual people and not Hollywood Squares boxes.
100%. The energy is so different. It's like something about like being there in person just like makes everyone like a lot chippier, like a lot more focused, I think, a lot more attentive. And something I want to do if and when we start playing in person, and maybe like we'd have to like furnish a home studio. Like, we don't have access to like a professional studio here. Something I would want to do is like open warm-ups with like theater games. You know, like go around and do like theater game warm-ups so we like get into the acting mood, right? And then we sit down. This is like kind of like off topic, but then we'd have to hire a producer. Like, I would not be able to run the game and also produce if we were like playing in person.
That's the challenge. Yeah, playing in person, like, you know, so for our on Quest and Chaos, when we play in person, I'm in the studio with the players, and there's somebody else like keeping track of bits and all that stuff. I don't, and I just have a monitor that I see, and it says like, you know, the Baroness gave 500 bits, and I, you know, when I'm ready, I'll just say thank you, the Baroness. You know, whereas now I'm over here on this monitor, I've got the Twitch chat, and I read that more than I wish I should. You know, I'll like look in and I'll see that, and so being at, you know, when I'm just at the table in the room, I'm able to like focus only on the game, and that I think really helps me. You know, it's but it's also been an interesting community building thing to have our GMs be so responsive to the chat, because normally when we're in studio, we're not really interfacing with the chat as much.
That's a really interesting thing that you say, because something that myself and my cast, my players, are really intentional about is not acknowledging stuff that happens. Like, if someone subs, even if a hype train's going, or like someone gives like an insane amount, like, we don't acknowledge it. And it's up to our mods or my players, never me, because I'm like so busy like doing like a million things, right? To like type in chat, like, when they're not in a scene, my players or like my mods, you know, they'll be like, thank you so much for like giving. And we have a command that says like, we really appreciate, you know, you giving, subbing, whatever, hosting, rating. We can't acknowledge you right now because we're playing, but we really appreciate it. And we'll acknowledge it during the break, right?
And
or
that's
like
better,
when the
honestly.
show's over.
That's much better. You know, I think that if we had planned things instead of being forced to go, you know, virtual on a, like, I think like I run Saturday nights, and, you know, I think it was like the lockdown started on like Thursday. And so it was like, okay, does everybody have a webcam? Does there, you know, like figure, and it was, you know, it was a whole thing. But it's, you know, so it's not a bad community thing. I really like your system of kind of acknowledging it at the break and having mods that do that. I think that really, you know, that cuts out the most of the game show part of the thing. You know, you can do some quick announcements at the beginning, and, you know, acknowledge who needs to be acknowledged, and then just get right to the game. And it's better for everybody. So you talked some about your prep time for Transplanar. What, you know, talk a little bit about that conversation with the players that you were talking about, where you're like, you know, sometimes I'm going to tell this player I need X from you. And, you know, it is a different, because in the stream world, you're going for specific things. And so you can be a little more, like, you know, we'll openly talk about plot points where I'll be like, you know, next time this might happen, and so, here's where we might be going, and next time's going to be a puzzle episode or something like that. We'll kind of plan it out more than the home game. And so what are those conversations like for you with Transplanar?
That's a great question. So right now, our main D&D campaign is structured into arcs, and each arc is it's like a different. There's a different engine for each arc, right? And each arc is anywhere between 15 to 16 episodes, and we cap it off with an arc interlude that helps bridge the gap between arcs and literally get our players from one physical location to another physical location, or emotionally get them there as well. So something we started doing, this is our most recent arc. We're currently, as of this recording, in the middle of arc 3. I think we're about to do episode 11 this coming Saturday.
I watched 9. Yeah. Okay.
So that makes sense with where you are with our show. And something I'll do with my players starting this arc is I gave them an arc overview. They don't know what's going to happen at the end, right? So there's no spoilers, but they know the general direction of it. At the end of arc 2, I asked my players, what's your wish list for this arc? You can get as specific as you want. You could be I want a cool sword. I want to get a cool magical item because we haven't gotten any and we're level 10 already. And I feel we should have at least one rare magical item or something like that, right? Or I'm really interested in losing. I want us to hit a down point. I want us to all hope to be lost and for us to rally. And I'd be I can work with that. Thank you for giving me that knife. You're doing my job for me. So I'll take their wish list at the end of arc 2 and I put together an idea for arc 3. So how I plan my arc-based stories is I think of an end game. I always start at the end. I'm who's the villain here? Is there a villain or is it just a force, right? What's their goal? Right. And what will happen if they accomplish their goal? And what tactics will they employ to fulfill their goal? And then I just work backwards from there. So for arc 3, before every session, on a session to session prep basis, when we're all in the waiting room together, talking, and I'm doing face cams and stuff, I will drop a little session overview that says, here are the beats we'll hit before the break, and then we take the break, and here are the beats we'll probably hit after the break. So the session overview could be as specific as you're going to get to talk to this NPC before and ask her a bunch of questions, and then you'll get to explore the city. And then after the break, we're going to end on a big cliffhanger. You're going to meet a really important Thieves Guild. And that's pretty specific, right? But how they get there and the specific kinds of interactions they have and any role playing in between scenes is completely up to them. But that way my players feel equipped to do the session. They'll be okay, I know we got to hit this, this, and this. And they also help me with pacing. So I'm not always pulling and pushing them. They will cut scenes themselves and be all right, I feel like that's where we end. I feel that's where our conversation ends. They pass the baton back to me because we're also all keeping an eye together, but I'm the ultimate timekeeper, right?
Yeah. One more part of the game show host, watching the clock.
Yes, watching the clock. That's pacing for a streamed game, I think is critical, even more so than a home game.
Yeah, it's funny because my home game, pace doesn't matter. Because I know we're gonna end around 4, but it doesn't matter.
It's been 3 hours shopping. If y'all are having fun just shopping for magical items, go for it.
Yeah. But it was stream game. We're taking a break at 7:15, so either I have to start in my head going. I have done this before, sadly, where I'm oh, this would be a great cliffhanger, but it's an hour until the break. Oh man, what do I do? The weird choices you make. That's really so. Your breakdown is a lot more granular. And I think that, one thing that does is it lets the players it lets the players have a sense of where things are going. And so they can really see where their characters are in that.
Exactly. That goes back to the acting training, right? Actors, unless you're doing improv, work with a script.
Yep.
So they know where their character starts and they know where their character ends, right? And they know how to take that character through that journey, through how they portray it on stage, right? And they have lines that they can say with specific intentions and emotions behind them, right? This is unscripted for the most part. So me providing a kind of overarching structure or these are the specific beats and encounters that might happen, it helps. It's as much of a script as we get, right? It helps my players know where to position their characters emotionally and also physically. If we have to be by the docks, by the end of the episode, get your character to the docks,
Yeah. It feels like every stream game has an unintentionally beloved NPC. So what is your unintentionally beloved NPC?
Unintentionally?
Or intentionally? I don't know. I mean, So the reason I say that is that I feel like every GM like has one NPC that they just hate, whether it's the voice or whatever, and the players are like, I want more of that, you know.
That's so funny because I actually love all my NPCs unless they're total assholes. Like I'm playing them as assholes, but right. Then my players usually hate them too. There are several characters that jump into mind. The first one is Dalapathi Saeed. He is a tiefling bard that my players meet Arc 1, Episode 1. And he's the reason my players come together, right? So the premise here is that the PCs don't know each other. They're four strangers, right? But and it's on like the New Year's Eve, of my homebrew world. It's called Adolin or Bear's End. So they're all converging on this one place, Fireroot Farm, in the northern tip of the Republic of Talmud, in search of the same tiefling for different reasons, right? And this idea of the mythos around Dalapathi is that he's this amazing, legendary adventurer. He's like, this prodigal, like, inventor, and like he knows all of these amazing things about sailing and like anything, like he knows things that appeal to each of my players, like backstories, right? But when they show up, he's gone, he's missing. And his husband's like, I think he's been kidnapped. So my players have to like come together to like rescue him. And they go like shenanigans ensue, right? But the twist at the end is that Dalapathi is actually a big fat liar. And he stole all these stories from like an actual legendary adventurer. Right. So my PCs have to embark on like another journey to find like the real Dalapathi, who's this other NPC called Dr. Alusa, who's also a major NPC. Something I was not expecting is the audience loved Dal. They specifically loved that he was wearing what I described as a denim apron, which was sort of just a slip of the tongue. Right. They're like a jean apron, a japron. He's wearing a japron, so they like made fun of me ruthlessly in chat, like in our pilot episode, and that became like a recurring gag, like a running joke. And recurring another
gags, like I think that's the trick to the NPCs is when they become
yes.
Like we had one NPC that anytime my players were on a sea voyage, this character showed up, and they would just start expecting it.
Oh my god, yes. We have a recurring character, recurring joke, Magic Mike. He's like he'll cast like a zone of truth whenever people are like getting interrogated, and he'll just appear, like, oh, Magic Mike, there you are, like do your zone of truth thing.
I love it. That's awesome. One thing that I've slept on here and sandbagged on Transplanar. So Transplanar is a D&D game with a bunch of people having a great time playing D&D, but it is also, I think, a super important example of representation. Transplanar is a D&D game where, and please correct me if I misstate any of this, every player is a member of the trans community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, that is, I mean, it's wonderful to be able to see that kind of representation. And I mean, that's me as a cis white guy. For you, it must be even more exciting to be able to create that community. And like, what is the response been?
The response has been amazing, frankly. I would say like the vast majority of our most active like audience and like community members in our Discord and people who show up, right? Like week after week, they tune in, they sit down, like, and they give their time to us, which means so much, are trans. I would say that like 90% of like the people who consistently do that are trans. And like great. They see, they're like, it's a, feedback we've gotten is like, it's so amazing to see like the trans community represented like on stream, like in D&D, like I, feel seen. It's also important to us that we, we're a majority POC cast as well. We have 2 white players. I'm Chinese and I'm the GM. And we also have another Chinese player, and a Black biracial player as well. So it's also important to us to like represent that side, I think, of like marginalized identity, and the world that we homebrew. I have the map back here.
I know, I was
one of our fans made it.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a piece of fan art from Saga. She's amazing. She's a great map maker, by the way. You should hire her. She's so good at doing maps. But in our world, we joke, but it's also true that like all of the NPCs are trans, except for the villains, which is also really funny. Like I introduced this, and also the majority of our NPCs are explicitly like people of color too, like Black, Asian, brown, right? I'll describe them as having dark skin. It's also important to me to describe NPCs using wheelchairs, NPCs who are older, who are younger, who are like fatter, who are thinner, etc., to just have a diversity of bodies and people. But we have a like recurring gag that like NPCs who are like white or like dudes like are the villains. But I think it's just funny, and it's not, we're not really trying to make a statement there, but it's just funny.
But that also, I think, speaks to how comfortable, like playing a game like this in your own community has to be a different experience for you, because you can sort of you can make those jokes that your community will understand that other communities wouldn't.
Exactly, like 100%. And it's funny because like whenever I introduce like a shitty villain, both the players and the audience would be like, they're not trans, they're not valid. Like that's, and I'm like, no, he's a trans guy. He's just a shitty trans guy. You have to accept it.
They exist, sadly. And how, like, this is sort of, to me, this is a perfect example of, looking around and not seeing your community represented in our world of gaming and saying, fine, I'll make it myself, and here's the place for it. And I just think that is awesome. I'm super, even if the game weren't entertaining on its own rights and fun and a great group of people that, I really enjoy, I'd still be supporting it just because I think you have to, as an ally, which is a word that is fraught with all sorts of stuff, but, it's important to lift up voices that are not like mine, because God knows we've heard enough from old white guys.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's, that's a thing. So, I wanted to have you on here to talk about GMing, but I also want to have you on here just to say thanks for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's important to me, and it's also important to my team. Like when we first got together and sat down and like drew up a vision board for what we wanted Transplanar to be, like during our session -1, during our first ever production meeting, we were like, it's really important to us to represent ourselves and to hold a space where other trans people, specifically like trans youth, can like feel seen and like represented, and to like curate like a community, an online community and offline, hopefully, if and when that comes, where these values are first and foremost, right? This idea of like trans acceptance, of like transness being the norm, of like your gender identity not being questioned, of like just get out of here with that racist and sexist bullcrap. Like you're not welcome. That shit is not welcome here. And like being very explicit about that has been like a very important guiding principle since like day one.
And just the positivity that, so you're not like, your version, the version of representation that I see in Transplanar in the world that you've created and the players you have is just, I think, overwhelmingly positive. And so it's not like, what's the term I've heard, oppression porn or anything like that. This is this is just trans joy. And, and I think that's super important.
It was important to us that, so I have this one character, Xiaohu, who's a tabaxi, like a panther-like tabaxi, right? And Ri uses Rim pronouns, which is a form of neo-pronouns that I'm, even as like a trans person, I'm new to using. So I'll like slip up occasionally and refer to them with they, them, when refer to Rim with they, them, right? Like pronouns when Ri uses Rim pronouns. And like Ri talks like this down here. And like Ri is really gruff, right? Like I'm rough around the edges, but Ri has like a heart of gold and is very sweet. And everyone's like, oh, Ri is a himbo, like Ri is a himbo, which we think is funny. A thembo, right? A rimbo,
I guess.
A rimbo. So it's important to us to have to represent like being trans isn't like anyone's shtick, right? We don't have like the token trans character who's like, I feel trapped in the wrong body. We're like, that is so 101. Like we are beyond that. Like goodbye, right? Like our trans characters' problems are like, there's a shattered echo of a god trapped inside of me and it's gonna eat me from the inside out, right? Instead of like, my parents don't accept me for who I am, because we're not interested in that shit. Like we're beyond that. We left that behind in 2013, So it's important that we can portray trans characters that are complex, right? That like show the full range of human experience. So there are, of course, like trans NPCs that are just good. You know, they're great. They're good. They're good characters. They're allies, you know, to the party. And then there's like trans NPCs who are dicks. They're total douchebags, right? They've got problems. They've got flaws. They've got trauma, and they take it out on, you know, on the PCs and on the people around them that they love, right? So it's important to us that all of these characters are given the honor and the privilege and frankly the right of like being fully realized 3D, like fully fleshed people and characters beyond just their gender identity.
Yeah, I think that's you know, it's something that you know, you can, as an outside viewer, I can see the clear intentionality there, and I think that it's a credit to the work you do in that session 0, sort of establishing a tone and then building that up and reinforcing that tone, you know, kind of throughout and just keeping that going. So not only you're like D&D Renaissance person, not only do you do Transplanar, which is awesome, but you also have something that I think is a genius idea of you have a Patreon that is GMing tips. So people can join and sort of get this whole thing. And actually you've started doing, let me get the name right, Professor Chang's Tabletop Workshop. I enjoy that.
Yes.
And these are videos that are just sort of you doing this video talking about, you know, there was one on pacing that I was just watching. And, you know, how did, you know, it seems like this is something that should be everywhere. Like it seems like I thought there would be like 30 of these. Like when I was like, I'm gonna make a GM podcast. What the heck? You know, and I'm like, there's probably 40 of them. There really aren't. There's not a lot of people talking about how to be a better GM. And so I really appreciate the stuff you're doing there. How did you kind of start with that?
Well, thank you for all that. First of all, Ezra, I know there are resources out there for sure. If you just Google like DM tips, I know Dragon Talk, Shelly Mazanoble. There's a lot of blogs. Sly Flourish is one that comes to mind, as well as like the Monsters Know What They're Doing, and like the Angry DM. I think like there's stuff out there. But first of all, I wanted to make my own series because at that point, I was like, I've been doing this for a while and clearly something I'm doing is working, because, you know, the reaction to like my GMing on stream has been very positive. I've been like asked to like guest DM on all these like amazing like channels and like podcasts and whatnot and show up as like a player and like get interviewed by like various people, yourself included. Like, so I'm like, something's working, right? Like
take this off your resume quickly.
I'm gonna add it. I'm gonna add this to my resume. It's gonna be like in bold lettering at the front.
Well, you're never getting hired again. That's
too late. And I was like, it's a passion of mine to talk about GMing, right? Because it's a big part of my identity now, right? Like playing D&D for so long, and this is like a big part of how I spent my day. And also it just feels like it was a kind of resource I wish I had. Because like the primary videos and articles I would read and watch included the ones I just listed, as well as like Matt Colville's Running the Game was when I like was first getting into D&D, and like specifically his like action-oriented monsters, like bit about like poaching stuff from like 4th edition to like add in 5th edition, and like a bunch of his lectures, like I, you know, was taking notes and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like this is how I want to incorporate it. But like now that I've synthesized like all this information and I continue to synthesize, I'm always like looking to read other people's takes on DMing, right? And watch their videos, because I'm like, what can I take from this? What do I agree with? What do I disagree with? What can I learn, right? What can I like flesh out and expand on, right? So I you know, Professor Chang's just felt like a natural course of action. So I was like, I talk about this all the time with my partner. This is just me talking, but recording it, right? Sharing it with a audience.
Well, I often say like the genesis of me doing this podcast was, you know, we would at our, you know, our local cons here in the Bay Area, and even, you know, at Gen Con and stuff like that, you run your game, it's 1 a.m, you're not you know, you're a little keyed up, and you're at you know, you go down to a table and just sit around with your friends and talk about how your game went and just shoot the breeze about GMing. And, you know, I miss those conversations so much. And so this is kind of scratching that same itch. And, you know, your point about like everyone's bringing their own angle to GMing. and sometimes it takes you a while to figure out what your angle is.
Yes, definitely.
Maybe you're really good at running a table. You've got combat down. Maybe you're really good at the long-term story stuff. And the trick is, for me anyway, like I know I'm really good at fast, like I can do the improv stuff, and like I can, sure, the story's going to do this and I'll add that, and I can pivot on a dime. I'm not good at like running combat. So that's like what I look for information and what I'm not good at. I'm like, okay, I'm good over here. How can I find stuff on things I'm not as good at?
So the way I feel about that is GMing is a skill, right? Which means it can be improved. Yeah. Right. Which also means that I think some people are naturally inclined toward it, like how some people are naturally inclined toward swimming or toward writing or drawing, right? Some people just have like that je ne sais quoi, that like natural talent, I guess. And it's harder for other people as well. And there's also a difference between, I think, being good at something and enjoying it. I don't like puzzles, and I also happen to be kind of bad at doing puzzles, both because I'm not bad at it because I don't enjoy it, or like okay, there's a lot of negatives here. So what I'm going to say is I don't like puzzles, but it's not because I'm not good at them, right? I just don't like them. So that motivates me to like just not put puzzles in my games, right? So I just tell my players, if you're really interested in puzzles and like a traditional dungeon crawl, don't come to my table because you're not going to have a good time, like straight up.
I had a conversation with a GM. I played in a game he ran at a con, and he did a really great job of putting in puzzles, but the solution to the puzzles was based on the characters, not the players. Because all too often, like riddles and such like that, it's the player the challenge is for the player,
what
not
the GM as a person is thinking. Yeah.
And he did such a, like, I was fascinated by that. Cause like for me, if I have a puzzle, like I tried this with a con game that I ran. I did a puzzle and the answer was whatever the players came up with. It was like, but they didn't know that. And so they were like going over this map, and I made this like stupid riddle that could have been like 9 different places on the map. And I'm just like, whatever they decide it is, that's what it is, because something you said a while ago, you were like, it's not, you were talking about combat and you're like, it's just not entertaining if you miss, that's just, and same with the puzzle. Like, think very carefully as a GM about whether or not that false, that false lead is fun.
Yeah, totally. And that's sort of how I approach like just building encounters in general. I'll be like, all right, they're up against a sea monster, right? Like they probably, lightning damage probably be smart, right? But what I'll do when designing encounters is I won't even have a solution. I'll be like, I don't know how they're going to get out of this, but my players will always come up with something. They'll be like, wait, this is crazy, but can I do this? And I'll be like, yes, you can. And that was the solution all along.
I always joke in my games, everything has a dramatically appropriate number of hit points. Like I don't keep track of hit. I do not either. It feels like it should be dead now. So, that was, how did you kill it?
Yep, especially for a stream game, I never keep track of hit points. I do write down the accumulated damage because I think it's fun to see how much damage they deal, like just over the course of a battle, just for myself. I think it's fun. But I never just, that's something I learned after running combat, like my first time for Transplanar. I kept to the HP as written, and the combat kind of slogged. My players were like, it's not dead yet. Oh my God. Or they'll be like, oh, that kills it, but not my awesome flame fireball attack from like last turn, but this random dagger stab. Okay. Right. So like now I've learned, right? I've learned from my past mistakes, and I'm really excited about sharing what I've learned.
It's interesting because D&D combat is, I think, different than a lot of other games because, and once again, please excuse my prejudices here against D&D. D&D is like almost resource management. It's like this fight is supposed to take 20% of what you can do today, and there's a weird, like, the GM trying to whittle you down to the design of the thing trying to whittle you down to where when you face the big bad guy, you're like, oh man, I'm down to my last, what is comprehend languages going to do here? And that's just not what interests me. that kind of, and that's why I like some of the changes that they started in 4th, but now in 5th, where like, you don't have the first level wizard who's like, well, I cast my spell for the day. Anybody want to take a nap? You don't have that anymore, which was, like in 1st edition, we used to, back in the day, every wizard had a crossbow or like something, because once you cast that sleep spell, you're going to start doing something, because we're still walking for 6 more hours.
And it's interesting because of how that scales as you level up. It gets harder and harder for the DM to like exhaust your resources in like a way that doesn't slow down the game. You know what I mean? So the way we've been circumventing that in our stream game is we're just kind of, that's just sort of not a concern. Like we know that the name of the game for us isn't resource management. So even if they do roll up against the baddie with all of their spells, with everything, they're like kitted up, I would just be like, great, that just means I get to make them harder. Right, that just means I get to like make the baddie at like their full power. Like, good luck. You know what I mean?
And once you've run a table for a while, you have a sense of like, okay, this is a finale, or this is the dramatically appropriate moment for this thing to die, or for whatever, or for something to blow up, or something like that. And
definitely,
I am a big fan of, triggers where like I'll add some chaos to the game. Like, so I was running my home game yesterday, and one of the bad guys ran to a wagon full of black powder and lit the fuse. And then I'm like, all right, I just rolled a dive. You got that many rounds. What are you doing next? And
until it like explodes.
Yeah. And they don't know when, but so they're like, do we run over there? Do we have time? Can we, but they're still fighting at the same time. You can use a little chaos to make things more, to sort of undo some of that like rote kind of feeling,
Yes. Another thing is always, especially at higher levels, right? Because even at lower levels, like combat can feel a bit more exciting because you're like, I could actually die here, right? Yeah. But especially at higher levels, I always try to have the objective, there to be a different objective other than like whittle down this huge bag of HP to 0, right? So like the example you gave is perfect. Like there's now a ticking time bomb, right? So we have only this amount of, we don't know how many rounds we have until we get to whittle down this bag of HP. So we better throw everything at it, or we have to try to stop the fuse, right? We have to like stop this thing from going off, or it's better yet, if you have innocents in the area, like get the innocents to safety. As like another, yes, you always want to have objectives other than just beat this thing, right? When you're running combat, is a GM tip I would throw out there.
Yeah, I mean, just we talk so much about having the monsters or the players have goals and objectives. Your villain should have goals and objectives, and 100%. If something's an animal, sure, it can fight like an animal. But if you're fighting something that's smart, make it fight smart, and make it wants to do this. How's it going to do it?
So like whenever you're planning your big set piece battle, always think like, what is the big bad evil guy trying to accomplish that isn't just quash these adventurers, right? Maybe they're trying to do a ritual to summon an even bigger badder evil guy. Maybe they're trying to, I don't know, like they're always trying to do something, right? Even if the something is like persuade the PCs to their side. So you could homebrew a move that they take a legendary action where they pause, right? And it's like that epic moment in like a movie where you're fighting and then the bad guy says its evil speech, right? And then like you ask for like a whiz save, like to see like, or like you ask the players like, does that make sense? Like, does what they're saying like actually appeal to you? Maybe like offer them a little bit of a carrot or a stick, for them to say yes. Like if they say yes, then you get this like bonus, or like if they say no, then you take like disadvantage on your next attack roll or something. Like I'm always like thinking of ways to like homebrew like emotional aspects of like combat into like a mechanical way. That's important to me as well. But that's like its own like video, its own like interview.
That's the whole thing. Yeah. Well, you've been very generous with your time, and I want to be very respectful of that. So, what are your favorite systems to run? What are systems you love to run?
Masks: A New Generation.
Oh, I love Masks.
I am a GM for Magpie Games curated play program. Where up until they're a great group. Where up until very recently, I exclusively ran Masks. So I've run this game like a million times.
That's a lot of teenage angst. That's a lot of angst.
It is a lot of teenage angst, a lot of shitty adults that now I'm great. I also love putting MILFs into all of my Masks games, like really hot women who are like so mean. They're so mean, but they're so hot.
Is the villain.
Yes, exactly. Masks I love. I also really like Monster of the Week.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is also PBTA, but it's not just for teens. You know, there's like monsters and dark stuff.
Monster Hearts, if you want the.
Yes, I'm actually going to be running. I think I mentioned this earlier. A Monster Hearts game. Yeah. I do enjoy. Go ahead. No. I was just going to say I also do enjoy D&D 5th edition, but only if I get to like homebrew the hell out of it. I enjoy playing it vanilla more than I like running it vanilla.
I'm with you. I actually far prefer to run something than to play it. Like I'm going to be playing in a D&D game that we're going to be playing on stream for Quest and Chaos, and I was like, man, this is more work than GMing. Like I had to make the character, and nowadays you have to make the little guy in Hero Forge and all this.
Oh yeah.
More work. I spend less time on GMing than I did on this.
That's
partly
really interesting.
I don't know. Well, I was like learning D&D as I was, I haven't played much D&D since like 3.5. So I have no what so you it sounds like Powered by the Apocalypse is sort of your
definitely my bread and butter. I've really enjoyed Jammy. They're he's the creative force behind Sword Queen Games. They've made they're making Apocalypse Keys with Evil Hat right now, which I'm very excited about for them. They also made Balik Bayan Returning Home, which is a belonging outside belonging sort of like hack of like a cyberpunk. Like it's really cool. I've really enjoyed Jammy's games. They scratch that narrative itch. The players have so much narrative power in those games, and it's incredible.
Have you played Fiasco? This sounds like something you would.
Yes. I played Fiasco maybe like 9 months ago at this point on Utopia TV's Twitch channel.
Oh, nice. It's Fiasco is almost always like, it's my favorite role-playing experience just because it's just pure. It's just inject that right into my veins.
It's chaos. It's pure chaos. Yeah. Which I really enjoyed. I would totally play it again.
So what's a system you haven't run that you would love to run?
I've played, but I haven't run Blades in the Dark. I'd love to give that a try. I'd love to really try that. Something else, probably Wanderhome. I don't
know Wanderhome. What's the...
Yeah, it's a new game published by Possum Creek Games, which is run by Jay Dragon primarily, who's the designer behind that. And it's like a pastoral, I think like Animal Folk, right? Wander Home, and it's like little rabbit folk, like very Studio Ghibli. There's also like a dark side to it. Like it can get kind of vicious, which I also really enjoy. Like channeling like Redwall feels, I think.
Okay.
Huh. And Watership Down a little bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, we end every episode the same way, and I feel bad because I always sandbag on this, and I don't tell the person this is coming. It's the Space Jam question. So Martians are invading the Earth, and they will destroy our planet unless you run an awesome 4-hour game for them. Connie Chang, what are you running for those Martians to get them to not destroy the Earth?
I will run a one-shot of Masks: A New Generation where they have to play their teenage alien versions of themselves, working through the trauma that's clearly made them want to conquer other worlds. So I'm going to use it as therapy.
There have only been a few people with the Space Jam question who have used the game as an allegory for like what the poor, I want to reach
be a reason
on a deeper level.
Like y'all are aliens who have mastered like space and time travel, and you're using it to colonize? Like dig deeper, my friend. Like resist that instinct.
Oh man, that is outstanding. Connie, thank you so much for being on. This was awesome. Folks, go check out Transplanar. You can find information. There's the YouTube channel for Connie's GM tips. Transplanar's on Twitch. It is big fun. Thanks again, Connie.
Thank you so much for having me on this amazing interview, talk show, podcast, stream.
Nobody watches. You don't need to blow this up.
You never know. You never know. Just let me know when it's coming out so I can pop it on all my socials.
Will do. All right. Until then, friends, keep the game moving.